Welcome to CharityVillage Connects. I'm Mary Barrell. Well, what a difference a few months make in politics. Canada has a new Prime Minister with the election of Mark Carney and yet another minority Liberal government. The closest competitor, the Conservative Party, lost after the evaporation of its massive 26-point lead in the polls, notwithstanding gaining its highest popular vote in decades, even while its leader, Pierre Poilievre, lost his seat, as did the leader of the NDP, Jagmeet Singh. All this in the shadow of Donald Trump and the existential threat of his tariffs on the Canadian economy, not to mention the continuing threat of annexation as the 51st state. But what now? And more importantly, for Canada's nonprofit sector, what will the outcome of the election mean? What are the anticipated policy shifts, funding implications, and what should nonprofit leaders be watching for in the months ahead? To help us navigate these important issues, we're joined by Andrew Chunilall, CEO of Community Foundations Canada. Andrew was appointed CEO following a 6-year tenure as Vice President of Finance for the London Community Foundation and his long-standing service as a finance and regulatory expert for Canada's philanthropic sector. As CEO, Andrew is working closely with the CFC leadership team, board, and foundations across Canada to help the philanthropic sector transform, innovate, and meet the new challenges and opportunities in 2025 and beyond. Welcome back to the podcast, Andrew.
Thanks for having me back, Mary. Always glad to talk about these big issues with you.
Well, from your perspective, how might the Liberal win, particularly under a leader like Mark Carney, impact the landscape for community foundations in Canada?
Yeah, it's a good question, Mary. One of the things that we were looking at when the election was happening was just looking at the different platforms, particularly with the Liberals and the Conservatives and the NDP. And in every platform, there were things addressing issues that were important to Canadians and important to communities. And the big ticket items were cost of living, affordable housing, climate and energy, immigration, issues specific to young people, issues specific to seniors in Canada. So every platform had something in it to address these very specific issues. And so when we look at the Liberal platform, there wasn't anything specific to the nonprofit sector or to philanthropy or to community foundations, but they were tackling the issues that we were tackling through our network of community foundations. And so that was a really common thing. And I couldn't speak to all of them, but let's speak to one of them because I think this is a big issue today, and that's cost of living. And so the Liberals within their platform had specific tactics to deal with that. One of them was reducing the income tax rate on the lowest income tax threshold by 1%. And that helps everybody that has a job and that pays taxes. But at the same time, it doesn't help those people that don't pay taxes. So there's a bit of a gap there. The other thing was the Liberals canceled the increase in the capital gains inclusion rate that the previous government had. And that's a really positive thing, to not be taxed on your capital, or to be taxed less on your capital. But again, it only helps people that have capital to be taxed on. One other thing that was in the Liberal platform around cost of living is the elimination of GST on the purchase of new homes up to $1 million. And that certainly makes it easier for people to get into the housing market. But that's only if you have enough money for a down payment to buy a home. The average home price in Canada is around $700,000. Clearly much higher in places like Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, like the big centers. But what if you don't even have enough money to do that? And so again, there are things in all the platforms that sort of address, particularly the Liberal platform, address some of these issues, but they still kind of leave some people out. And that's where philanthropy comes in, and that's where we have an opportunity to communicate with government and say, hey, these are great things, but what about this other group of Canadians that are being left out from some of these policy decisions?
It's a very good sort of overview of what I observed as well in looking at the platforms. But in particular, of course, of interest was the Liberal Party's platform. What about the leadership of Mark Carney? I mean, his focus is, of course, on the economy. And there likely are priorities that he would be looking at. Um, and among those were not anything to do with the not-for-profit sector. And I guess overall, though, do you have any observation about a new government, a new Liberal government under a leader like Mark Carney?
Well, of course, it's notable that we're having this interview today, which is I think May the 6th, and Mark Carney is at the White House, and he's been at the White House this afternoon, and there's been a lot of reports from that. And Mark Carney's strength, as you suggested, is that he's a central banker. He's been a central banker in two very progressive Western economies, Canada and the UK. He's got a business degree from Harvard and University of Oxford, I believe. He's written books on the economy. So that's his strong point. Now, there's no question about it. In all the party platforms, there were initiatives and a focus in on growing the economy. It reminds me back, if we go way back, and this tells my age, to when Bill Clinton was elected president, and he beat out the incumbent George Bush. But his campaign strategist was a gentleman by the name of James Carville, and he had this saying. He said, "It's the economy, stupid," and that couldn't be more true than it is right now, which is everybody's really focused in on the economy. And listen, we've got great blueprints and architecture on how to grow the economy, and Canadians are resilient. We have great businesses. We're innovative. We can do things. We've got lots of natural resources. We've got really smart people. Growing the economy is something that we've been doing for a long time. That's not specifically the issue right now. The issue is wealth and income inequality. The challenge is that we're growing the economy in such a way that the people that hold the top 20% of the wealth in this country are getting a disproportionate higher share of that wealth than those at the bottom 40%. So if I could break this down into numbers, the top 20% of wealth holders in Canada hold 2/3 of the aggregate wealth in Canada. The bottom 40% of wealth holders in Canada hold 3% of the aggregate wealth in Canada. That disparity has never been higher than it is right now. And the four things that drive that, which are obvious things. So people that hold financial assets like stocks and bonds, that's part of the wealth generation. People that own real estate, we talked about housing, that's part of wealth generation. People that receive intergenerational wealth transfers, that exacerbates the distance between that 20% and the 40. And the final one is access to education and skills development. So when we look at those four factors, I think that's where a government really has to pay attention to those factors, because those are the things that are driving the wealth inequality as the economy grows. So it's not just growing the economy, but it's growing the economy so that the bottom 40% can have an opportunity to hold financial assets, hold real estate, have access to education and skills development, and so on. And that's how we sort of bring the bottom up, so to speak. And that helps to deal with cost of living, housing, immigration, healthcare, education, all those other issues.
In a way, rebuilding the middle class, so that there is actually, I guess, a larger amount of funds available, expendable funds, funds that aren't going towards, rent or your housing or your groceries, that you can actually contribute to potentially, fundraising of your favorite charity, for example. So building the economy around this is essentially that, is it not?
Absolutely. Take a look at what is probably the most expensive thing for many Canadian families, and that's housing. And so the average price, as I mentioned, of a house in Canada is, let's say, $700,000. In order to qualify to purchase a house like that, you need to be making around $130,000 a year. That should be your median household. That's just at the bottom end. That's as worse as you can do. But when you think about what the mortgage payment is against your income, that's half of your income. Half of your income is going to housing. And to your point, um, you need cars, you need insurance, you need food, you need clothing. You've got to have all these other expenses, and the numbers just don't add up. And that's why the middle class is feeling this more than anyone, because it's not just that housing's become affordable, but everything else has become unaffordable as well. And so the ability to enter to acquire that significant asset that is real estate is so difficult that it's causing the further distancing of that top 20% and the bottom 40%.
And so, what do you think this sort of, I guess, the perspective, since we've discussed the fact that the platform that the Liberals were elected on didn't really address anything to do with philanthropy or the nonprofit sector. What do you anticipate in the context of what has been announced, how that might influence the federal approach to philanthropy and its approach to the nonprofit sector? And of course, we know the nonprofit sector is very frequently, depending on the organization, funded directly by the province or municipality rather than the federal government. But it's the programs, of course, that they actually support that allows that money to flow through. What do you think that what kind of changes can we anticipate?
Well, I think there's two things here. The first thing is capacity, and the second thing is reach and community. Um, when we do see economic growth, and we certainly expect that with Mark Carney, and that's why people voted for them. They believe that he can get us back onto that track. When we see economic growth, more resources start to flow into community. People are more generous, more wealth is created. We see that capacity starts to build up. The second thing is, as I said, is partnership to gain reach. And so the federal government is very it's Ottawa centric, but it's also riding centric. It's not necessarily community centric. And so there is an opportunity for government to partner with civil society organizations like community foundations or otherwise. We have that reach. We're in community. We have the relationships. We have the knowledge and the data to inform good decision making at a very local level. Now, we're all Canadians, and there's a strong sort of a unifying thing about being a Canadian, and we certainly feel that right now. But we're still very hyper local. People belong and connect to where they are, and federal governments, doesn't matter which country or which economy, have difficulty in reaching those different constituencies. And so there is a natural gravitation to partner in those areas to optimize not only what philanthropy is doing, but also what the federal government might choose to do in terms of policy or the movement of resources and capital around the system.
Well, on the point of policy, what signals or policy shifts are you watching for that could impact how community foundations invest in their local communities?
Certainly, when you take a look at the expenditures from the federal government, we all know that the most of the spending goes into healthcare, education, physical infrastructure, etc. And I think at the base level, we need those systems operating extremely well. And right now, all those systems, particularly it was starting to happen before the pandemic, but it definitely accelerated through that. And I don't know that much has changed. When I speak to healthcare workers, when I speak to teachers or people who work in the education system, those systems are overrun. And we even saw Mark Carney a couple of days ago make an announcement about capping the number of temporary foreign workers that are coming in the country. We know that we've gotten caps on student visas. We know that we're going to try to get our immigration numbers to a manageable level overall. Because we see that the increase in immigration, people are equating that to at least a factor as to why some of these systems are overrun. So we definitely want to see the government do things to shore up the system. And one of the things that they're doing is that was in the Liberal platform is to invest $4 billion in community healthcare infrastructure. I don't know exactly what that means, and we'll probably learn about what that means in the coming months. But that's going to be critical. When I look at the demographics of Canada, those that are aged 65 and over, when we get to 2030, that will be almost a quarter of the Canadian population. Think about that. 1 out of 4 people, when we get to 2030, are going to be over the age of 65. And having community healthcare infrastructure in place to deal with healthcare needs, isolation needs, food security issues, just general care, love, empathy, and belonging, we're going to definitely need that. And I think where philanthropy can play a role is being really smart and working and partnering with government in terms of informing how those decisions and how those investments are made.
Oh, that's very interesting, and I see the connection that you're making to that sort of hyper focused community that is really exists within the context of the larger sort of federal programming that might be coming into effect. Do you think the Liberal government will expand or evolve its approach to social innovation and impact investing? And what role could community foundations play in that space?
Absolutely. So the previous government had made investments in the social finance fund and building out the ecosystem of supporting social entrepreneurs and people that are doing that impact related work. That is a growing part of our economy. More and more younger people are going into impact related work because it gives them a deeper sense of purpose and it gives them that connection to community, and they're doing things that are supposed to be providing a positive impact. And I see that as one of our key tenets and way forward. Now, when I looked at the 3 platforms during the election, there was no mention of social finance. And I deduce from that, I'm going to go back to James Carville's comments, which is the economy stupid. And when people are feeling a lack of safety because the economy is so uncertain, they want very clear and articulate ways in how we're going to regenerate and rebuild our economy. And the term social finance probably doesn't land well politically in an environment where people are feeling unsafe about their jobs. It feel like it's a term that's not well understood. So I can understand why politicians didn't use that word, and I can understand why it's not directly in anyone's platform, especially a liberal platform. That being said, we've been working with the previous liberal government for many years on building out that ecosystem. I know that politicians care about that work. I know that they see value in it. And I expect that they'll be paying attention to that work as we move forward. That said, even if the government didn't feel like they could partner in that space right now, philanthropy has a lot of resources. Like just in the Community Foundation Network, we've got somewhere around $7 and $8 billion of assets that are endowed assets. And we do have an ability to make that impact, and we do have an ability to invest in social entrepreneurs and in the social innovation economy. And I think we'll continue to do that. And there's an opportunity for us to expand on that work as we go forward.
Many community foundations serve as bridges between local donors and larger, even national causes and issues. How might a new federal mandate affect donor interests or expectations?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the key here is it's a federal government, and they're in charge with governing of second largest country in the world. And as I said before, when the federal government thinks about making investments, oftentimes it's very riding specific. It has a political orientation to it. And I think there's a marriage between the work that the government does and the work that civil society does, which helps to bridge the federal policies, how resources are moved into civil society in a way where the resources are reaching the intended or delivering on the intended outcome at the community level. And that's really around partnership. And as you said, donors are an important part of that. So donors will have an interest in things like homelessness or mental health issues. And of course, the federal government, the provincial government, and municipal governments are doing work in that area. But the real impact happens is when those levels of government are partnering with civil society, because we're the ones on the ground. We're the ones that are hearing the story, dealing with people, collecting that important data to help drive and optimize how resources are allocated and helping us to deliver better outcomes overall.
And, you've mentioned how the whole, focus wouldn't have mattered really whether it was a conservative or a liberal government. The focus was on building the economy. But we know that can't happen overnight. And we certainly are still facing huge risks to our economy as a consequence of tariffs and, other sort of, I guess, uh, trickle down sort of impacts that are caused by tariffs on the markets and other impacts to our economy, in turn, including shutdowns and people losing employment. So we still potentially are going to be seeing a significant increase in need within society as we work through this growth of our economy, this process that, again, won't happen overnight. So how do you see community foundations having a role to play in supporting community and the organizations that are there to, help out those that might be in need during this really consequential but difficult time?
Yeah, it's a good question, Mary, and it's something that we're continuing to think about. I don't know that we've landed on all the important roles that we can play. Clearly, we can't solve the issue on our own. I live in London, Ontario. That's in southwestern Ontario. This is a NAFTA superhighway area. Many people work in the manufacturing sector where goods that we're producing are going to the US and now because of tariffs are more expensive, particularly in automotive. Now, the Liberals within their platform did announce funds specifically targeted at industries that were directly impacted by tariffs. I think automotive was one, steel industry, so thinking about Hamilton and areas, another one. So there is federal funding there. Uh, I think where we can play a role probably takes a couple of different directions. I think being advocates for community. We do have relationships with government. We do have that important connection with MPs and MPPs, and being constantly in front of them with new data and new information so that they can take that information forward to continue to build policies and social safety nets that help to sort of secure people's well-being and safety. I think the other thing is that the programs that we're working on is maybe we need to get really specific in terms of where our granting is going. And like the government is targeting very specific industries that are impacted by tariffs, would philanthropy do the same? And I think that's also happening as well. And those discussions are ongoing. That happened that's happening with immigration. When you've got as many immigrants coming to Canada as we do, we are putting more resources into resettlement agencies. And so if tariffs are impacting a specific industry, then maybe our granting needs to be redeployed into those areas as a means to sort of shore things up in the short term.
Philanthropy is often shaped by tax policy and regulatory frameworks, or at least influenced by them. Are you anticipating any changes that could either help or hinder charitable giving under this new Liberal government?
There's nothing that I saw in the Liberal government platform that would encourage more resources or take any away. Like the things that I would normally be looking for is, is there a higher charitable tax deduction credit for donations? I didn't see anything like that. Were they going to change the capital gains inclusion rate on donated securities? I didn't see anything like that. Were they going to allow private shares to be donated without capital gains implications? I didn't see anything like that. So there's nothing there in the platform that's sort of jumping out at me. That being said, and I've always said this, and this is a contentious issue, and sometimes sometimes it sparks a bit of controversy. But from a global perspective, our policy framework in Canada is very it's very supportive of our sector. We really have an appreciation for civil society in Canada. We want it to grow. We want it to flourish. That is not a common thing around the world. And our frameworks are very permissive, and they're flexible enough for us to do our work. I think where we get caught up is our own rules. We kind of create our own systems and belief systems around things that constrain ourselves. And I think where we can do better is to look at our own rules and our own internal dealings in terms of how we work with community, in terms of how we disperse resources, in terms of how we invest our money, in terms of how we engage our donors. Those are things that are completely under our control and that we can change and evolve. And so it's always been my message to call upon my own sector leaders and say, hey, if we could do things differently, we don't need the government to change rules. We just need to change our own rules. And I continue to put that message out there.
Now, I've been speaking to government relations folks just post-election to find out what their thoughts were that work with folks in the nonprofit sector. And their impression was the government was intending to move quickly, that their impression was that they're going to try and I guess wipe away the cobwebs, be much more efficient in decision making, try to get rid of some of the bureaucracy and things that slowed down decision making in order to take action quicker. I'm curious whether you see that same sort of momentum in your discussions with people in the leaders in the nonprofit sector.
Yeah, I think what I hear you saying, Mary, is that the government's looking at ways to streamline the operations of the government. And I certainly saw that in the Liberal platform, the use of AI, the use of technology to cause the public service to be a little bit smaller, create efficiencies and more optimization. And that is something that I think all leaders are looking at, not just in the profit world, but also in the nonprofit world. Because obviously, the more efficient we are, the better we are, and the more money we can put out in the community. I would say that we're in the very early stages of that, of looking at how we can use things like AI or other advanced technologies to help us do our work better. People are certainly using things like ChatGPT and so forth and so on, but and that certainly makes people more inefficient. And yes, it makes organizations more efficient. But I wouldn't say that we've gotten to the point where we're saying, we can fundamentally change our business models because we've got a specific technology or LLM in place that helps us to do things better. But that's forthcoming, and that's certainly imminent.
I'm curious, is there any role that you think foundations can play in helping the sector to build a stronger advocacy capacity or policy engagement skills in this moment of political transition and the coming months when, I guess, we've only seen the beginning of the platform in this very short election period. So the government will continue to unveil, I think, the outcome of their policy decisions. How do you think the foundations could have a role in any sort of advocacy that might take place during that time period?
Yeah, I think advocacy from our sector has typically been, in the eyes of the government, a little bit chaotic and unclear. And the reason is because what they assume that the advocacy, the issues that are coming from community should all roll up and be in a nice bow. And it should be one position that's very cohesive and well articulated. And that's just a pipe dream. I remember being in discussions with lots of MPs and people in government. They said, well, Andrew, you have this particular point of view, but we talked to some folks yesterday who had a different point of view, who are part of your network. And we talked to some other people in philanthropy and they had another point of view. And I said, yeah, if it's your expectation that we should all have the same point of view, what country are you living in? And so I think it's really challenging for government because they feel as though they should get a strategy from the sector. And I think what we have to do as a sector is try to make our advocacy more consumable for government, which is we have to hold space for multiple different points of view but we have to really say, like, here's why we're showing up in this particular way. We don't want to cut other people's legs out either, because they have important advocacy positions that may not be the same as ours, but nonetheless, it's no less important. And that's why I say this marriage between hyper localism and federalism needs to find its way and figure its way out. And I think more so than just advocating, we need to think about how our messages are getting through, but how they're being consumed in a way that our political leaders can do something with that advocacy.
That's interesting. And you've talked about the partnership aspect that community foundations have with government. In terms of collaboration, do you see opportunities for deeper alignment between the federal government goals and community foundation strategies in areas like you've talked about housing, but there's other areas like mental health, Indigenous partnerships. You've mentioned immigration. What do you anticipate in the coming months?
Yeah, we're actively staying in close touch with government, and we're like right now is an important time because the mandate letters haven't come down yet, and so we don't have those details, and those when those mandate letters come in, then we will scour through those letters and we will start to look for opportunities. But that's a key part of this process is to know where each cabinet member is going, what their priorities are. And then we can sort of align resources and leadership from within our sector to say, hey, this particular housing strategy is unfolding, this particular mental health strategy is unfolding. How does that align with what we're currently doing? Start to have those conversations and then build the partnerships.
And looking ahead in over the next year, what do you anticipate being some of the key political challenges impacting the nonprofit sector? And to wrap it up, whether you have any advice for nonprofit leaders when they're looking to navigate these challenges.
Well, the one thing I'm hoping for personally is continuity of government. I don't know that I can handle another election anytime soon. I hope that this government gets a couple of years to show if it can get some things done, and that's important, particularly for our sector, right? Like if there's non-confidence votes and the prorogation is in place, like it just causes everything to pause. And now's not the time to pause. And I would say this irrespective of whatever government would have been elected. It's not in favor of any one political party ideology. I just think continuity of government is really, really important right now. The second issue is austerity. I think, this is a sort of a tightening of the belt moment. However, it's also, as you've pointed out, a higher needs moment too. And so I think we have to be really smart about austerity and how we exercise that. I appreciate that the Liberal government has, at least during the election, positioned a deficit budget. And I think I'm like all other Canadians, you prefer to see a balanced budget, but nonetheless, I think we got to take care of people and do right by folks. The third thing is more as it relates to how people feel. And any time the R word comes up, like recession, or now it's the T word, tariffs, and both those things go hand in hand today. People start to feel unsafe. They start to feel like their jobs could be at risk. They start to feel like even if they have a job, things are getting more and more expensive. And so that impacts people's moods. It impacts their demeanor. It impacts how families operate and family well-being and mental health. And so that can create a whole other set of issues for people when that level of stress is in the household. So I'm really concerned about that. And I think philanthropy has an important role there in terms of building community and fostering a sense of belonging within those communities. But and the last I'll say is just, hope. And I think having a leader that can offer that, hey, it's a difficult time, but there's a pathway to a better future. And I think we as leaders in the sector can offer that as well and offer a strong sense of hope.
Well, Andrew, I certainly agree with you that I don't think I could take much more of an election anytime soon. So I agree. Some continuity is very much needed at this time. As always, it's such a pleasure speaking with you and hearing your important insights on both the present and future challenges facing the Canadian charitable sector, especially in these very uncertain times. Thank you for joining Charity Village Connects.
Thank you for having me, Mary. My pleasure.